Hello, we're taking up the stream of thought here about the digestive system from where we left it off. We said that it was all prepared in the mouth with starch digestion having started, breaking apart these starch molecules so that the glucose small molecules are now free. The food now has gone down the esophagus, it's in the stomach, and a new phase of digestion starts. Here is where protein digestion starts. So we need to know a little bit about what protein is like. Protein is not made of glucose, unlike starch. Protein is made up of little units called amino acids. These are molecules that are about the size of glucose or even smaller. And we'll put A for amino acid. There's not just one kind of amino acid, there's quite a few. We'll say the first amino acid is A1. And in any protein, you have that amino acid linked to another one. And we'll call that one A2. And then we have another one, A3. And maybe A1 is repeated here. So you can see this is more complicated than the starch molecule in the protein molecule made up of all these amino acids. You have a variety of units along the way. And the protein enzyme that's going to break them apart is going to be called a proteinase. That A's ending means an enzyme that breaks apart molecules. But here in the stomach, it is given a special name. It's pepsin. Pep is a little unit meaning having to do with protein. And there are other protein enzymes further down in the small intestine. But the one that we're talking about here in the stomach, we'll put it down here, is pepsin. And what we need to notice then is pepsin, being an enzyme, a knife that slices up protein, separating, for instance, this protein link between amino acid 1 and amino acid 2. It is tearing apart proteins, and therefore this pepsin could tear apart the wall of the stomach. Now, we told you how this would be a problem, this digestion of protein, because the pepsin could destroy the stomach. And so now the issue is, what has been done to protect the stomach from pepsin? That's what we want to explain. In the stomach wall, what comes out is going to become pepsin, but it doesn't come out as pepsin. It will come out as a slightly different molecule called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen, instead of being a knife that can cut right away, the pepsinogen is like having a cover on the knife, a sheath on the knife. If you have a knife, a dagger, and it's inside a cover, then of course it's not going to do any cutting if the cover is on it. So let's just put here that the pepsinogen is the knife, but now with a cover. Pepsinogen is like the pepsin, most of the molecule is the same, except it has what we could call a cover on the molecule. And we're showing it here as like a sheath on a blade. So I'm going to put this along here, the cover for the knife, and let's just put it crossways like that. So there you have the knife put away in its sheath, and it won't cut anything. So it's not dangerous to the stomach the way it comes off of the wall of the stomach. Now, another thing that's produced by the stomach wall is acid. And so let's put that here. The acid is hydrochloric acid, a strong acid, and we can put the chemical name here, hydrochloric acid, HCl. And that acid is important for what it's going to do. Once the pepsinogen that has no blade open to cut, it's covered by the sheath. Once it comes out into the fluid of the stomach, it encounters the acid, and the acid does away with the cover. The knife is taken out of its sheath. So that's what the hydrochloric acid does. So we'll put an indication here that the hydrochloric acid acts on the pepsinogen and changes the pepsinogen into pepsin, which now will cut protein. Meanwhile, the pepsin is no longer right against the wall of the stomach, hopefully. It's out in the juice of the stomach where it has been changed by the hydrochloric acid from the pepsinogen. But the pepsin now, since it's in the stomach contents, it could come back and attack the stomach wall. We need more protection. And that's what's being provided in this whole system. Let's use a different color here. There is a covering on the wall produced by the wall of the stomach, which is mucus. Slimy, sticky kind of material all along the wall of the stomach, covering it well enough so that very little of the pepsin can get back to the stomach wall. So we have two big mechanisms to protect the stomach. We have this mechanism of pepsinogen being inactive and needing the hydrochloric acid to become active, and that will happen once the pepsinogen is out in the mix away from the wall of the stomach. And the second mechanism is the production of mucus to protect the wall. Now, the protection that's provided by these two mechanisms works well, but if the food is in the stomach for very long, sooner or later, in fact, I would say always, you're going to have at least a little bit of the pepsin that can come through and start damaging the wall of the stomach. If it's very little damage, no problem. The stomach, the intestines, are very set up to repair any damage that occurs. But if you get a lot of damage, widespread damage, then the wall becomes inflamed. It can get worse than that. Instead of just wall inflammation, which is called gastritis, you can have erosion of the wall. It can actually tear parts off the wall, and that would be an injury in the wall, a hole, an ulcer in the wall. And if that hollow in the wall goes all the way through, you have a perforated ulcer, and the stomach contents is right open to the abdomen, a real big problem. And an ulcer of any kind is already a bad enough problem. So, what factors here are going to make a difference for whether this pepsin causes major damage in the stomach wall? Well, one of those factors is going to be how long is the food in the stomach. If the stomach, with its churning of the food, by the way, the muscle wall contracts and swishes the food around. By now, I guess you probably couldn't call it food, but there it is working with the different enzymes, the pepsin as well as the starch enzyme, the amylase from the mouth, and there are other enzymes at work. There it's working, and sooner or later you start having the pepsin getting at the wall. If you have the food staying in the stomach for 1-2 hours, okay, you can get along with that. But when you get longer than 2 hours, you start having more problem. There's going to be more damage to the stomach. What is it that makes food stay longer in the stomach? Well, we could give one answer. A huge meal, too much, more than we should eat. But there's a particular kind of food, a nutrient in food, that delays the stomach emptying. And that food or nutrient is fat or oil. They're really, in nutrition, they're considered together. The more fat or oil that is in food, the more the food is delayed in the stomach. And the delay causes the valve at the bottom. There's a valve right here, another circular valve, another sphincter called the pylorus, that has to open to let the contents of the stomach come out into the small intestine. That pylorus is going to stay closed longer if there's a lot of oil in the food. Now, what foods have a lot of oil? Well, the average meat that people eat has a fair amount of fat. In fact, animals are made to get fat because it's felt that that's a better flavor. So meat has a rather high percentage of fat in it, not just the protein of the muscle. In dairy foods, of course, butter is all fat. And milk has some fat. That's the fat that becomes the butter. Cream, of course, is quite fatty. But plant-based foods do have significant amounts of fat, at least in certain ones it's rather high. And that's particularly true in the nuts. Almonds, walnuts even more, have a high percentage of fat. Sesame seeds, high percentage. If you've seen where sesame seeds have been ground, if you see it in a clear vessel, you can see that when it settles, it leaves a good proportion that is oil on top. So there's plenty of fat even in plant foods. When is it too much? Well, I remember reading in a textbook of physiology, the study of function in the human being, a textbook of physiology where it told how long it would take in the stomach for different kinds of meals. And the longest of those meals to get out of the stomach actually was almonds. Now, the amount of almonds was large. It was a good big bowl of almonds. It'd take a while to eat that. So here we're not talking just about animal products. If you're eating a very oily or food with a lot of nuts, whether it's almonds or pecans or walnuts, keep the amount down, because otherwise you're going to be delaying the food. In this textbook of physiology, it said that a large amount of almonds, like a good-sized bowl, would take 4.5 hours in the stomach. Well, we already talked about how in 1 to 2 hours it's best if the food has left the stomach. You know the rule about swimming, that it's best not to go swimming for at least an hour after you've just eaten a meal. And some people would say 2 hours. So if you've eaten a large amount of fat or oil, that would be even longer. I'll tell you another thing that really makes a difference for how long the food is going to stay in the stomach is eating between meals. An interesting experiment was done. They had a gastroscope. That's an instrument where they put a tube down the esophagus into the stomach, and they have a light, and there's fiber optics so that the man running the thing, the operator, can look right at the wall of the stomach. And so they had the person whose stomach was being looked at, they had him eat a breakfast, and then, say at 8 o'clock, he ate the breakfast, and then a little later in the morning, maybe at 10, he decided to have a few peanuts. And then at noon, he ate his midday meal, his lunch. And then at about 3 in the afternoon, he wanted something more, a donut. And then in the evening, he ate his supper. And then maybe a little bit more somewhat later, around 9 in the evening, he had another little snack. They checked on what the content was in the stomach with this gastroscopy. And they found that 13 hours after his breakfast, when they examined the stomach contents, he still had some of the food from breakfast in his stomach, 13 hours later. So talk about staying a long time in the stomach. With eating between meals, one is doing that. And what easily happens is erosion of the stomach. They've done gastroscopy studies on particular foods that might affect the stomach wall, spices that might inflame the stomach. In fact, if you take garlic that's raw, it can even hurt your skin. Well, they checked on the stomach wall after the person ate some hot chili pepper. And the stomach wall was somewhat reddened, so a little bit inflamed. They then checked with the gastroscopy after the person took an aspirin. The stomach wasn't just a little bit inflamed, it was bleeding. Drops of blood were coming off the wall. One of the worst things for the digestive system is aspirin and other drugs like it, what are called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs. These cause bleeding. In fact, statistics that of a number of years ago showed that there were 20,000 deaths in U.S. because of bleeding into the stomach from aspirin. Now, we want to go back for a minute to this entry into the stomach from the esophagus. Remember, we talked about a sphincter there, this lower esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter, that should stay closed to keep all the stomach contents in the stomach and not coming back up into the esophagus. Now, the stomach is moving, and there's a little bit of pressure. It could push things back up, except for that sphincter holding them in. But if that sphincter gets relaxed, if it loosens up, then clearly you can get some of that stomach contents coming back up. And that's a serious problem, because not only can you get the contents coming and sometimes coming up into the mouth, and you sense the acid. Probably all of us at one time or another have sensed this reflux of stomach contents where it becomes acidic and kind of nasty in the mouth. But even coming up just a little bit is not a good thing, because now the contents in the stomach have this pepsin. It didn't have pepsin when it came from the mouth, but when you go back, the reflux has pepsin. What does pepsin do? It destroys protein. And this whole wall of the esophagus, just like the stomach, as we talked about, is made of protein. And so you're going to get this pepsin acting on the esophagus. And the esophagus is really not well prepared to meet this challenge of the pepsin. The stomach, we already explained how it is set up by the Creator to handle this issue of pepsin so that it doesn't destroy the stomach. But pepsin is going to be able to do more in the esophagus. And so you're going to get inflammation, what we call esophagitis. So what is it that makes it easier for stomach contents to go back up into the esophagus? What relaxes the sphincter that's here? Well, these standard vices do that. Smoking, alcohol, caffeine, all relax that. But there is another substance that we think of as a good herb, and that's mint, peppermint or spearmint. Mint tends to relax the whole digestive system. So if you really want to protect your esophagus, don't eat a mint after just having a meal, or at least a big meal. And don't drink a herbal tea of mint right around the time of eating your meal. Now we're ready to talk about what happens to the food further down the digestive tract. There's a whole new issue that we haven't mentioned that makes a big difference in terms of good function versus disease. It's tied up with the whole story of what was discovered by a missionary a number of years ago. We'll get back to that in the next session.